Good evening and welcome to my first ever Ask the Experts event. I know that some of you are new here, so I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Ann Garcia. I'm a certified financial planner and a partner at Independent Progressive Advisors, which is a fee-only financial advisor in Portland, Oregon. I also write a blog called The College Financial Lady, which, as you can probably guess, is all about paying for college. And I'm a mom to twins who are college freshmen. I get a lot of questions from both my clients and people who read my blog about topics that are outside my area of expertise because college planning is a really big topic. And so I decided to start this event series in order to provide access to some experts in other areas of college planning. Tonight, I'm talking with Julia Surtshin. Julia founded College Ahead in 1995. Following her passion to help parents and high schoolers navigate the transition from high school to college with confidence and optimism. One of the longest practicing independent college counselors in the Portland area, she's particularly well suited for this role by her past education and experience. Julia earned a bachelor's degree in anthropology from Barnard College in New York and a master's in education from the University of Southern California. Prior to founding College Ahead, she worked with students as the assistant director of student affairs at the UCLA School of Engineering. And then in 2010, she became a certified educational planner. Julie is a leader in her field and a member of the Higher Education Consultants Association, National Association for College Admissions Counselor, and currently sits on the Board of Commissioners of the American Institute of Certified Education Planners. Julia's website is collegeahead.us. So we're going to talk a little bit and then we'll open it up to your questions. You can use the comments field in the live event to post questions to us, and we will do our best to answer them. This is our first time doing this, so bear with us as we sort through the technology and the kinks and whatnot. You know, Julia, I was just thinking back to 2 years ago when my twins were juniors in high school, and my daughter and I were planning a summer trip to the East Coast in Chicago to look at colleges. This summer, that's not something that families can do, but the timing is such that kids still and their families, students and their families still need to be researching colleges. What suggestions do you have for families to research colleges and find good fits in the current environment?
Well, Anne, first of all, I'd like to say thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to be here. And
oh, my pleasure. I'm glad it worked.
Series for families, especially in this time of distancing. I think what I'd like to start out by saying is that there's no one right way to do a college search. No two students' college search is going to look the same. And you probably know that because your twins' search didn't look the same. I think one of the things that is a lot of concern is because campuses are closed, you can't go visit. I would encourage families to kind of start with what they know. There is so much unknown right now, but there's a lot that families know and students know if they take the time. I actually think that this house quarantine time is a great opportunity for high schoolers to take some time and engage in some focused self-reflection. Because coming up with a good college match means that what the student wants and needs is matched by what the college offers. And focusing only on colleges and not on the student makes that difficult, if not impossible. If you don't know what if you don't know what you're shopping for, you don't know what to look for or buy. So I think that that's really important that students think about what they want in a college, why they're going to college. And there's a whole series of questions that I ask students to provoke that self-reflection. But moving forward, I think that research in colleges is like peeling onions. There are all kinds of layers, and I encourage students to approach it kind of methodologically. Colleges really want students who are resourceful, and they want them to participate in their own education. So this is the time for students to drag out their set of research skills. And kind of the first step, all those resources are still available to families. Guidebooks, articles, websites, those all students can still access. And I would think that it's really important for students to go beyond the obvious suspects of institutional websites. There's so many other websites for students to access. The kind of the middle layer of resources is where students are probably having trouble because you can't go to a campus to visit and see other students. But colleges are really ramping up. Most colleges, in addition to having virtual tours, and are putting their info sessions online, and some of those are taped like webinar things, and some of them are interactive with Q&A sessions. So don't just give up and say, because I can't go to an info session, assume that there are no info sessions, because there are. I was asked this question a few days ago by someone, and he said, you know, what does my student do? And I said, one thing you can do that most students don't think about is, once you've connected with an admissions representative, ask them to put you in touch with current students. Maybe a current student who's even from your hometown. So that's a great way to kind of like have almost your overnight visit without being there. Those are just some tips.
That's a great idea. I know another thing that has been really active with both of my kids' colleges is their Facebook parents group.
And other Facebook pages, and there are tons of YouTube videos that kids can access, like a day in the life of a Princeton student, or this is what my residence hall looks like. There are tons of YouTube videos that kids can find.
Yeah. Excellent, excellent. Hey, one of the big topics right now, because of the SAT and ACT not being available right now, is test optional. Can you talk a little bit about test optional, you know, where it makes sense and where it doesn't?
Okay, so it's a really difficult call, and it's always been a difficult call, because answering that question is really dependent on understanding an individual student, what the student's other academic credentials are, what his high school and his curriculum is like, what other extracurricular involvements the student has, what their previous test history is. So it's kind of complicated. And that's one reason why I think that whenever possible, students and parents should really engage someone in a discussion of this, whether it's an independent counselor like myself or the student's school counselor. It's really important to make an informed decision. More and more schools are going test optional, and a lot of students assume that test and optional automatically equates to easier to get into, and that's not the case. I think that students who are thinking about test optional should remember that they probably don't have their college list finalized. And the college landscape is changing very quickly. And most high schoolers don't want someone else to tell them what to do. They want to be their own bosses and be in control of their own futures. So the issue is, how do you leave your options open? I think if you opt out of testing at this point, you may be limiting some of your options. So I would encourage students to keep on the course that they pre-COVID-19 set out for themselves, unless there is some overriding reason to make a significant change. I know I've spoken with one testing professional here in town, and he is making the suggestion that several of his students who had decided on the SAT to think about switching to the ACT. The ACT organization has been a little bit more proactive in setting up and being ahead of the curve about adding more test dates and being able to accommodate the deluge of students who are going to want to test once things open up, and we don't know when that'll be. So that's one thought.
Yeah. And if you, just so I understand this right, if you take the test and then apply to a test optional school, there's no, it's not like, you know, some of the schools require you to submit all your scores, not just your, rather than super scoring. I mean, if it's test optional, it's your choice whether or not to submit a test score.
It's your choice, but I think that students, like most answers in my field, it depends. Mm-hmm. Students really need to understand what the policy is at their school. So some schools say they're test optional. Some schools say they're test optional, but they're also test blind, meaning that even if you submit them, the school, they're not going to look at them. And the way the data transfer happens, the admissions people might not ever see them anyhow. It's not that they see them and they ignore them. They might not ever see them. So you have to really understand how each individual school is going to operate.
Yeah.
And what other requirements they might ask for. Some in the past, pre-COVID-19, students who did not submit test scores were asked to submit other things. I think that's going to be changing, but again, I think it's always important to read the fine print.
Yeah, and I have a feeling it's going to be different for the cohort of students who are juniors this year, who are going to have just less options to test than other students.
Right.
No, like for both of my kids, ironically, my daughter's at a school that is test optional, but the only merit scholarship they give is national merit. So you can choose not to take the test, but you might be costing yourself some money in the long run. And my son likewise got a very generous scholarship that was solely based on his test scores.
I think that may change some, and in a lot of the schools that have announced that they're test optional, they have said very clearly they're only test optional for the class of 2021. That's not necessarily a new policy. So again, it's important to understand. In the past, yes, a lot of scholarships have been predicated on test scores. I don't know. I don't think people have sorted out how that's going to look for next year's class. And I do think that most admissions people understand that generally students will have fewer test dates and there may be somewhat lower scores.
Mm-hmm. Good to know. Good to know. So tell us a little bit about working with a college admissions counselor such as yourself. How does that process work? How does a family find someone who's a good fit?
Well, how it works is we all work differently. I mean, there's many professionals here in the Portland area, Portland metro area, who do this kind of work. We, in the big picture, all do the same thing, but we do it very, very differently. In terms of a good fit, first of all, I think you have to really make sure your team's amenable to that, to working with someone. I think that on the base level, working with somebody who is a member not only of the National Association for College Admissions Counselors, but also either the Higher Education Counselors Association or the Independent Educational Counselors Association, or Consultants Association. So somebody needs to be a member of HECA, IECA, NACAC, PNACAC. If the person is not, I would really question their commitment to the profession. You mentioned at the beginning of our time that you are a certified financial planner. I am a certified educational planner, and just like you, that's another designation that people in my field can have. People who have the designation CEP have been rigorously vetted, and there are a lot of IECs in Portland who are not CEPs. There are only a small handful of us in Portland that are. So there are a lot of people who are really good who aren't CEPs, but if you find a CEP that you think will work, that's a little bit further assurance that person has been professionally vetted. I think match is really important. It's a fit between that personality, that person, and that person's process and philosophy. And I'd say, look at websites. What does it feel like on a gut level? And then call up and give people a call. I always am happy to talk to families on the phone, free of charge, no obligation. Let's get acquainted. I think that's the way to get a feel for it.
Do you have any questions for me, Julia?
I do. For many years, they've been around for a long time. And I'd like to know from your perspective what you think about 529 plans, and whether, in your opinion, there's like a limit beyond which you would not recommend families contribute anymore to those plans. So that's not question. A problem most people have. But.
Right. That's a nice problem.
Yeah.
Nice problem to have. So I'm a huge advocate of 529 college savings plans. I know a lot of people would tell you that you're going to lose out on financial aid if you save for college. And in fact, if you save for college, you give yourself a lot more choices in the process, because very few schools will actually meet all of your financial need, and those that do are very, very competitive to get into for obvious reasons. So having some savings is really a great way to increase the opportunities available to your child. There's 529s tend to be the best option for college savings for a variety of reasons. I mean, first of all, there's the tax benefits of the tax-free growth and distributions. And many states also offer a state tax break for contributions. There's sort of a hidden benefit of 529s compared with just a regular taxable investment account, which is that when you take a distribution from your 529, it actually doesn't get reported as income on the FAFSA. Whereas if you sold stock in a brokerage account or sold mutual funds in a brokerage account and took the money out to pay for college, not only would you pay taxes on the capital gain in that, but you would also report it as income on your FAFSA, and it would increase your expected family contribution. As far as how much to save, obviously it varies family to family. Everyone's intentions are different. Everyone's goals with respect to paying for college are different, and of course everyone's resources are different. You don't want to save more than the likely cost of college. But then again, we really don't see a lot of families who have too much college savings. And frankly, if you did, you could turn it over to your next kid, save it for grandkids, whatever, lots and lots of things to do. We tend to see, families go one of two directions. So either on the one hand, we hear the ones who say, oh, if I save for college, I'm going to get less financial aid. So they put everything in their retirement accounts, and retirement savings is great. But you really do need to have some college savings. But we see people on the other side who say, oh my gosh, college is so expensive and that's sooner than retirement. So they load up their college savings plan and underfund retirement. And that's not a great way to go either. You'll have a lot more choices of price ranges for college than you will for retirement.
So it's a balancing act.
It is a balancing act, and there isn't one right answer for every family, and oftentimes that's something that'll change, change year to year. But just so people understand the cost of savings in the aid formulas, every $1,000 you save will cost you $56 in expected family contribution. So you're still ahead by $946, $944. The other thing that's great about 529s is with some of the changes in the tax laws, you can now use them for private K-12 tuition. You can use them for trade schools. You can use them to pay off student loans if you end up with a surplus and maybe somebody else in your family had loans. And then there are other things that you can use them for, like community college, or if you take any dual credit classes in high school and need to pay the college tuition portion of the dual credit, you can actually use your 529 for that as well.
Sounds like you're a huge fan.
I'm a huge fan. I'm very glad that we saved in 529s, because when the time came for our kids to look at colleges, it gave them more choices. The fact that that we weren't just trying to pay for everything out of cash flow or loans.
Right. Okay. So I have another question that I would say the bulk of my families have, and that is they've calculated their EFC, their expected family contribution. They have a number, but they can't really afford that number. What's your response to that?
Yeah, so that's a problem for a lot of families. The EFC formula is really, really goofy. But let's talk about what EFC is and what it isn't. So for those of you who are new, EFC is expected family contribution. When you fill out the FAFSA, it takes your income and your assets and gives you a number called your expected family contribution. And that's really the minimum amount that you should expect to pay for college on the basis of financial need. That doesn't mean it's what college will cost you. So it's a great idea if you're a few years out from college to do the FAFSA forecaster and get an estimate of your EFC. But the purpose of doing that is not just to throw up your hands in despair and say, oh my gosh, our kids are not going to college if that's what it's going to cost us. Think of it really as a reality check to start the process of finding affordable options for your students. Because really the biggest driver of college costs isn't your expected family contribution, it's the choices you make around what schools you're going to consider. So your EFC could be a quarter or a third of your income, and obviously none of us could on an annual basis fork over a third of our income every year for college, and that's where planning becomes really, really important. Before I go any further, I'm going to get on my soapbox for a minute. I have lots of soapboxes, and this is one that I'm going to get on. I want to say this: the factor that's going to have the biggest impact on your student's life as an adult is not what school they go to, and it's not what they major in, it's how much debt they have when they come out of college. Because that number is going to determine, are they stuck living at home until they can pay this down, or can they choose where they're going to live in the world, assuming we get to that point again. Can they go to grad school? Someone who comes out of undergrad owing $80,000 is never going to be able to afford going to grad school, or if they do, they're just going to come out with just such a mountain of debt that it won't be worthwhile. Can they buy a house? People with overwhelming student debt have a hard time buying houses, buying cars, really doing any of those kinds of things. So back from the soapbox and talking more about what happens if you can't afford your EFC. If you can't afford your EFC, you really need to start researching merit aid and other paths. So merit aid tends to be far more generous than need-based aid anyway. It's always scholarships. Need-based aid could be loans, it could be work study, in addition to being grants. Merit aid typically goes to about the top 20% of entering students based on GPA and test scores, or potentially other factors that are desirable to the school. We all know of athletes who, or violin players, or kids who've won the science fair who on that basis. So you can spend some time on college websites and places like College Navigator or College Data to see where you as a student fit in with some of the schools that you're interested in, and what kinds of aid you might be eligible for. Net price calculators can be really helpful for that as well. Some of your research might show you, for example, that standardized tests and test prep are good options, because oftentimes it's easier to bring up your test score than to bring up your GPA, especially if you're already at the end of sophomore year or junior year in high school. But you know, a 100-point bump in your SAT score or a few extra points of ACT scores could yield huge rewards. I'd also point out that a lot of people think that merit aid is only available at private schools, but that's really not always the case. There are lots of public universities that have great merit aid. And in fact, what's really nice on a lot of the public schools is they'll publish actual matrices of what combination of GPA and test scores will get you what scholarship. And so you can look at that very easily and say, oh, look at that, I fit right in, you know, I would get this many dollars, and it's an automatic scholarship that you'll get. In any case, you know, any school that you're interested in, you should do the net price calculator to figure out what that school is likely to cost you. But the other really important piece of this is that parents need to be candid with their students early in their high school years about what the family can afford and what sort of financial support they're able to give their students. You don't want to wait until your high school senior is sitting on a stack of acceptances to schools that you can't afford to tell them that you can't afford that. You know, if you can guide that conversation earlier in their high school years, so that they're understanding where they need to be with scholarships, how much is a reasonable amount for them to borrow if that's a path that you're going to go down. All of those pieces of it are really important for students to understand early in the high school years, not late in the selection process. And unfortunately for students, their parents' ability to pay, not the parents' willingness to pay, but the parents' ability to pay is what's going to determine what their need-based financial aid package will look like. And then, you know, beyond merit aid, there are some other paths that can be really helpful. Things like community college, or choosing a school that's close to home where you don't have to live in dorms and buy a meal plan and all that fine stuff. Students who have a lot of AP or IB credit or dual credits coming into college should be looking to see what the schools that they're interested in do with those credits. You know, it's not unusual for kids who pick the right school to come out of high school with 2 quarters or even a year of credit completed through their AP and IB classes. Of course, it's also not unusual for students to come out of school with a full IB diploma and get no credit for it at all, just because that's their university's policy. So do your homework, research your schools, know what you're willing to pay, and communicate that with your students so that that's the starting point for them. You know, there are so many great options out there, so many great colleges out there, and you really want to make sure that that you're looking for ones that are going to create opportunities for them and not liabilities for them.
So I have one other question that relates to what we're living through right now, this COVID pandemic. Students have already filed their FAFSAs for the 2021 year. They've gotten financial aid awards, and now everything has changed. Parents lose jobs. What do you want to say to students who are looking at their award and they're just saying, I can't do it? Both my parents lost their jobs.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's really an important topic for students to know what they can do. So, especially now, because this is an unfortunate reality for lots and lots of people. Fortunately, there is a process in place to deal with it. A lot of people have the mistaken impression that they're stuck with the financial aid package that they get, and that's it for all 4 years. But in fact, any need-based award is annually renewable, and you can appeal your aid award at any point during your college career if your family's circumstances have changed. So there's a process called professional judgment that's allowed by the Department of Education. And the way that professional judgment works is you would reach out to your school's financial aid office, explain how your circumstances have changed, and then they can recalculate your award based on the new information that they've received. So it's important to keep in mind professional judgment is called PJ. It's allowed, but it's not required. So not all schools are going to do it. Some schools are just going to say, sorry, you get what you get. And every school makes its own decision, either on a school-wide basis or on an individual basis, whether they're going to offer PJ. Also remember that for the coming year, school budgets are really strapped. So colleges have incurred huge costs in transitioning to distance learning. Their endowment returns are down. They've lost money due to not having summer programs, refunding housing and meal plans, not collecting any housing revenue for the spring quarter. So there may be limited grant dollars available, just as there's a surge in need for those dollars. So I don't say this to discourage you, just to encourage you to be realistic about the process. The main thing to remember, though, when you do go through a financial aid appeal, is you will need to document how your circumstances have changed, whether it's a job loss or a reduction in hours or a business closing or anything like that. That's just a requirement. And the only thing that the school can do is recalculate the award based on new data inputs. They can't change how they use your data. But it's definitely an option, and I encourage you to do it. Do it sooner rather than later, because if your first choice school isn't willing to renegotiate your award and that ends up not being affordable for you, you might want to reach back out to some of your other schools. Because the other thing that's gonna happen this year is enrollments will be lower than they have been in the past, particularly at schools that enroll a lot of international students, because right now international student visas are on hold, and so schools don't know if they'll be able to admit those students in the fall. And there will be schools out there that are very eagerly looking for ways to add more people to their class.
I would encourage students also to be aware that colleges understand that students are having a hard time, and they're making all different kinds of arrangements. One school has decided that incoming students will not have to pay fall tuition for like 6 months or a year. So colleges are getting very creative because they understand this is a tough situation for everybody.
Yeah. And so you know, one of the silver linings of the situation we're in right now is this is a great opportunity to see how the school that you're interested in deals with hard times. Some schools are going above and beyond the call of duty, and others aren't.
And how they communicate that with students and how student-centered they are. I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And so our plan was to turn it over to questions right now, and I, being the technical dope that I am having a really hard time. I've seen that there are posts, but I'm not seeing what they are. So my apologies. If you have a question, yeah, you can message it to me, because I am not finding all the messages that were here. Okay, so someone asked a question, what was the place to go to estimate your EFC? So that is the FAFSA forecaster. It's the acronym FAFSA, so FAFSA #4 and if you just Google that, you will get the FAFSA forecaster.
And do you recommend, or what do you think of the finaid.org website?
So there's definitely a lot of, it's a great place to get started. There's tons and tons of information. Actually, let me make sure I'm talking about the right. Yeah, so FinAid has got tons and tons of information. It can be really nerdy. So if you like nerdy stuff, it's it's a really good starting place. My two favorite websites are College Data and College Navigator. They're also pretty nerdy. I would say College Navigator is way nerdier than College Data, but what I like about both of them is you can see all the different things that tend to get offered to students like you based on lots of different criteria. So based on merit, based on need, you can see what students owe when they graduate from college. You can see what kinds of jobs they go into. Those are all really good things there. And you can also see what was I going to say? You can also see 75th percentile test scores. So
I like FinAid.
Indicator that you might be eligible for aid.
I like FinAid for the estimators and the calculators, and people can play with different variables, and it's all anonymous, and so it's a good way to start taking a look.
Yeah. So here's another question. We have a sophomore. What are some websites or resources we should be looking at to help us streamline the whole process with testing and applications? Also, is there a listing of schools that offer relatively good value, meaning price for the academic offerings and outcomes?
Wow, that's a huge question. I don't think things are quite that straightforward, depending on where. I mean, one of the things that can be a really good value, in addition to in-state public schools, is in Oregon and California, Washington, we're part of the Western Undergraduate Exchange. And that's a consortium of public schools in 11 Western states that provide good value. Some campuses are completely what we call WUE, Western Undergraduate Exchange, WUE, and others are by program, but those options are very affordable. I think what's really important is, again, for the student to start with what he or she wants or needs, because something on sale is not a good value if you're buying something that's not appropriate to what you need. So be clear about, what kind of learning environment your student needs, what kind of teaching situation is best, that kind of thing. If your student needs some learning support, how robust are the learning support services? So I think it's a natural question, but it's very difficult to answer, which is why people like me provide a service for families and hopefully save them time and money.
Yeah, one of the things that I found was really helpful. So when my daughter and I were going to go and look at colleges, we, when it came to Boston, we looked at every single college. We signed up on their page for the official tours, and then we did the net price calculators for each of them. And it was really interesting to see literally our prices for different schools ranged from $9,000 to $81,000 based on the same set of information. So fascinating stuff.
But she had already identified those schools that she was going to look at. It's coming up.
She had identified a few, and then I gave her a bunch more because I felt like there was value in seeing some schools she didn't like, because I think when you're 16 or 17 years old, it's really easy to go, oh my gosh, there's going to be 5,000 people my age and no parents. How cool is that? Like, what could possibly go wrong? And lots could go wrong. Schools are very different, but you don't know that until you hear someone say something like, my daughter's kind of a quirky kid, and one of the schools we went to, they're like, yeah, we're about 60% Greek. I'm like, cross that one off the list.
But that's a good example. That's a good example of the very outer layer of the onion. because it's very easy to find out what percentage of students at a particular school participate in Greek life. That and similarly, it's very easy to find out what percentage of students live in college housing. So if you want a real community experience, that's another thing that's really easy to figure out early in the game.
Yeah. So another question is, how far ahead can you fill out the FAFSA form? So I'll go ahead and take that one. So the FAFSA is available October 1st of every year for the following school year. So you don't get a chance to fill it out ahead. However, a couple of things you can do. One is the FAFSA forecaster, and that is an estimator that you can use. It's much simpler than the FAFSA itself. The big thing that's not in the FAFSA forecaster is it does not prompt you to add back your pre-tax retirement contributions to your income. So that is something that is done as part of the FAFSA. If you contribute, say, $20,000 a year to retirement, the FAFSA forecaster is going to underestimate your income by $20,000, which will make your expected family contribution seem a bit lower than it is. So that's just something to keep in mind. The thing that you can do with the FAFSA itself is there's a PDF version of it that you can download from the FAFSA site. And then on my website, The College Financial Lady, I every year post the formula guide that the Department of Education publishes for the FAFSA. So you can go to my site, collegefinanciallady.com, and just search EFC formula guide, and you will find it there. And you can go through the super nerdy count every dollar process of calculating your EFC. But again, my recommendation would be, if you have schools that you're interested in, far more important than the EFC is the net price calculator. The reason for that is that schools can use direct student loans as part of their aid package. They can also use work study as part of their aid package. But the net price calculator can only show grant dollars that you're guaranteed to get. So it's a good exercise in how financial aid is packaged at different schools, and explains the $9,000 to $9,000 to $81,000 discrepancy. So someone else asked if we could post the links to the websites that we've mentioned. Of course, we will do that. We'll get that out to you. And if there are no further questions, I think we're going to call it an evening.
Thank you very much for having me, Ann. This has been great.
Thank you so much for coming, Julie. I really appreciate you being here. We will also post the video of this online, and then as I figure out how this works, I hope you found this informative. And please join me next week. So next week, I'm going to be talking AP and IB with Jennifer Warren, who is an AP Spanish teacher in Denver, Colorado. Besides being an AP teacher, she's also a mom to twins, as am I. Our 4 kids are all college freshmen right now, and all 4 have had really, really different experiences with AP and IB. So we're going to be talking about why you might or might not choose AP, IB, or dual credit classes, who they're a fit for, and what some of the advantages and disadvantages, depending on your college path, might be. So Julia, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone who attended, and hope to see you next week.